bashing is the name of the game in today's episode. Hello everybody and welcome back to the Pennsylvania in Berwind, where today we're going to be continuing work in the Highland region of the P&B. And today we're going to be removing the old meat packing processing plant and putting in a brewery. Right here I have what I've been looking at as the prototype for this build. I'm going to flash that right now. This is the Genesee Brewhouse in Rochester, New York. And if you can go back and pause it and look at it a little bit further, but I'm putting that up there because this is going to be quite the tangle of tracks that I'm going to be adding in here. And I wanted to just show you that there is a bit of a prototype that I am working off of, and I'm not just making this up on the fly. I did use this as my inspiration, though, particularly because I wanted to have a bit of a switching puzzle here. And we're adding quite a considerable amount of track to this industry. And I know that this is definitely going to complicate things at this point on the P&B because, for one, we are adding in a totally new industry that we did not have previously in the Highland area, and we're removing one that we're no longer going to be using. In doing so, we're pretty much going to be adding a whole new train into our schedule. And that's something I'll have to work out in the future, but I kind of have a feeling that this is going to be pretty much its own train coming down here to serve this brewery because of the amount of tracks that we're going to be adding and the amount of freight cars that are going to be going in and out of this facility. I think when I was setting up my cinematics, I totaled somewhere around 20 to maybe 30 cars could come and go out of this facility. I can't remember the exact number, but it's going to be a pretty sizable train that's going to have to come down here and work this place. So the idea here is to have another place for some grain hoppers to go, box cars, of course, some tanker cars, and I think that's it. Yeah, so it's box cars, tanker cars, and hopper cars are going to be serving this industry. And if I remember correctly how I did this, I have it set up so we have inbound grain. Oh, here we go. Yeah, I'm writing it down right now. Inbound grain. And then we've got inbound kegs, outbound beer. We got a couple tracks for outbound beer. We have inbound paper for packaging, so paper or cardboard, and that sort of thing. So that's the kind of commodities that are going to be flowing in and out of this place. I feel like, I guess let me start talking about this particular build itself, like what I'm going to be doing with it. I've been playing this game for a long time, and I've been doing a lot of builds in the past year or two, and I kind of have felt like I've hit a bit of a wall with the amount of assets that are out there that are actually decent looking. Like I find myself reaching to use the same, 50 to 100 assets, and I'm talking about buildings, trees, shrubs, grasses, and that sort of thing. So for me, things are getting a little stale when it comes to building facilities, and I have to constantly try to come up with some sort of a new way to reinvent the same, building designs or something like that, using the same assets. In doing so, at this point, I've been getting kind of creative with how to do that, and I've really started to dive into kit bashing buildings. And by that, I mean what you're seeing on the screen here, and that's taking a lot of different buildings, different building styles, and then clipping them together to make a sort of like a new building type. So if you go to Google Earth and you look up the Genesee Brewhouse in Rochester, New York, which is what I was using and looking at while I was building this, you'll notice that there is a lot of mixed materials in the builds there in the whole shop. You'll see a lot of old brick architecture, a lot of new prefab buildings, and then some stuff that's kind of in between. I don't really know all the technical terms for this sort of thing, but it is a real hodgepodge of mixed manufactured materials, I guess. So I wanted to get that look here, and I think that this adds a bit of history to the place too, being that you can kind of see maybe where it started off as like one or two of the older brick structures as the original structure, and then over time has grown, and as they've added new additions on for new packaging or shipping or whatever and expanded their operations, they've used different materials, prefab materials, or whatever was available at the time. So you end up with this sort of mixed looking, hodgepodge of stuff. So that's the look that I'm going for here. And again, using a lot of the same buildings that I've just been using and beating to death over the past couple of years. But when you start to clip them together and do something like what I'm doing here, build like a foundation and a loading dock, and just sort of change things up a little bit, you kind of add some new looks to buildings that you've been using pretty frequently. And, you know, the idea for this as well is to sort of have like a more cohesive, I guess like a flow from one building to the next. So by the time I'm done piecing all these different building pieces together, essentially they're going to act as one big unit. Because I've linked them together through other buildings that have sort of like a hallway or a conveyor system or a bridge or something like that. So essentially it's just one very large building, even though it's comprised of a whole bunch of smaller buildings. So as you can see here, I'm taking some of these other buildings and just trying to see where I could fit them and what looks good. It's not like I had some grand idea right off the bat of how I was going to piece these things together. A lot of it was just sort of experimenting, looking at Google Earth, and trying to see how I can kind of mix different looking structures together and make something that seems like more of a fully cohesive industry in itself. So you'll see me adding a lot of pipes and a lot of these like silos and things like that, storage facilities, and things to begin to connect each building from one to the next. And again, I'm not an expert on beer making process. I brew my own beer a couple times a year. I know how to do it in small batches, like in a bucket, you know, as a home brewer. So I know what the process is, but on a big scale like this, I'm definitely not an expert. So I just kind of have this loose idea in my head that you're going to have the hops and corn syrup or whatever kind of malt liquid sugar is going to come in on the tank cars and go into the top, the facilities at the top left there by the silos. And that's where maybe some of the main brewing is going to take place. And then in the large brick structures, that's where maybe the bottling takes place, or kegging, any of the distilling or fermenting, any of that could take place in there. And then in some of the lower relief buildings at the front side there, the ones that are only 1 or 2 stories tall, that's maybe packaging and shipping. So that's just the way that I've kind of imagined it, and tried to structure some of these buildings in a way that makes some sort of cohesive sense. And I think as this project develops a little bit more, you'll see how that's gonna all come together. But again, like I said, I'm just beginning to slowly and loosely experiment with different buildings and see how I can squeeze them together. I'm not paying too much attention to things like signs. I shouldn't say that I'm not paying attention to them, because any chance that I can to hide some kind of a sign or like a texture that has like a name on it or something like that main brick building in the middle says Budweiser on it, I hid that behind another building. So any chance that I get to hide stuff like that, I do my best to do so. But, you know, I'm not super focused on that because I'm gonna make other assets to hide some of that stuff anyway. I would like to make a sign specifically for this brewery, which I'm thinking of calling it just Highland Brewery. But let me know if you guys have a better name down in the comments below, if you've got any ideas. But I will make some sign assets, I think, to place on these buildings to really identify what it is and where it is in the world, in the P&B world. So I think that could be kind of fun. You saw the Ken Brewery, I think it said there. I'll make a sign to cover that and all that sort of thing. So I'm not super worried about that. So at this point in the build, I'm beginning to try to work in some loose details, some piping structures. I noticed that a lot of these facilities have a lot of pipes that are going all over the place. I have no idea if they're pumping like beer through there, or if they're pumping the wort through there, or if they're pumping any of the molasses or any sort of other brewing liquids through there. I don't know. I don't care. It's just a feature that I'm trying to work into it that I think identifies that it's some kind of an industry that does something. I don't know, So those are the kind of things that I think about when I'm doing a build like this. I'm not trying to think too much about what's happening with, what's being pumped through those pipes, just that it's an identifying factor, characteristic on the outside of the building. And that's really what I'm going for. So here I'm adding a conveyor system. I imagine that maybe some of these beer bottles or beer kegs or something like that are going to be put on the conveyors and shipped from the building to the left to the building on the right to be processed and packaged and then shipped out on trucks or via the railroad. Again, that's basically my loose idea there. And, it's just to add some sort of, it's really just to add a visual conveyor belt system between the buildings. So you can kind of paint that picture any way that you want in your mind, what its functionality actually is. So at this point, I'm converting some of the tracks to the R-Tracks street run. I wanted all these tracks to be buried in the pavement because I like the idea of trucks kind of sharing this space with the railroad. So maybe in some instances, some of the box cars aren't actually unloaded at the loading docks. Maybe they just get parked right on those tracks in the middle and kind of act as a team track. And, forklifts just drive up and load or unload them. So I really liked that idea, and we'll get into that in a little bit. At this point, I'm beginning to draw my attention to a detail that I really was looking forward to adding here. And this is like the brew house, like tasting place, I guess whatever you would call it, like the bar. It's the bar and restaurant. So again, I'm using the Jenny Brew House in Rochester as my inspiration for that. I spent a lot of time there when I was in Rochester, and you can go there, drink some beer, and get some good food, and it's right next to the train tracks, so you can watch the trains, the CSX trains, and whatever else go over the Jenny River. So a really cool spot. So I wanted to try to recreate that kind of feeling here. So I set up this little picnic area where you can, hang out outside and have a drink and watch trains go by, especially like right next to the tracks. I think that's just a really cool visual idea there. So I wanted to make sure that I incorporated that to some degree, because a lot of these places also have this. Like a lot of these big breweries, or not even big breweries, like medium-sized breweries, will have some kind of a bar or something there for people to go to and get, like collector's items, memorabilia, and maybe just have like a little bit of a history of the brewery and that sort of thing. So definitely wanted to make sure that I added that in there. And as time goes on, I'm definitely going to incorporate some more people and more detailed stuff in this specific area. So as has been the case with some of my more recent builds, I don't get too heavily into fine detailing. I'm going to refer to that as fine detailing in this particular episode, just because it took me a really long time to get all these buildings put together and figure out what the layout was going to be. And in fact, of course, I didn't end up completing this build because it did take that really tremendous amount of time, and I ran out of time to do other detailing type stuff. So that being said, we'll come back to this in the next episode. But I'm getting way ahead of myself because there's still more to this episode that I have to talk about. But you can see a pretty good angle here about how I kind of merged these buildings and made sort of a superstructure out of a whole bunch of these smaller ones. One of the things that I kind of have a bit of trouble with is the negative space in between and figuring out exactly what to do with that. My instinct is to just fill it with parking, but I don't think that that's necessarily the right thing to do looking at a lot of these places on Google. So I'm kind of leaving some of the bigger negative spaces open at the moment so I can sit on it and just decide what I want to do with it. I know that, I should add some parked tractor trailers maybe, or some debris, or things like that, but negative space is difficult for me to work with for some reason. I just want to fill it up with like another building or something else. I don't really like just having like a big empty spot, even though that might be kind of how it is in real life. But that whole far side on the adjacent side of the tracks, it's on the right hand side of the screen right now, I pretty much leave empty for the time being because I haven't decided what I'm going to do with it. And since we're still developing the Highland area and there's still like 3 other industries that we have to work into this whole place, I'm just trying to focus on one thing at a time, and then I'll connect them together in the end. I don't feel like, when I'm building in this game, I don't feel like, how I feel in like City Skylines, where in that game, I feel like you've got to lay out all your roads first, and then you can start figuring out, where your commercial district is going to be in your industrial district and that kind of thing. But in Trainz, I feel like I've got a little bit more freedom because I can do the opposite. I put the industry down, or I put the neighborhood down, or lay out the thing that I want to build first, and then I can incorporate my roads later around that. And to me, I don't know, that just like allows me a little bit more freedom to design stuff, I guess. I don't know. But I do prefer to work that way. So as I get ideas for things and we see how the rest of the Highland area is going to develop, then I will kind of probably work in some other supporting, we'll call them supporting details. Maybe other warehouses in the area, or maybe there's going to be a small neighborhood. I haven't decided that, and I'm not putting too much mental energy into it right now because it's just not worth my time. All right, well, my phone just rang and that kind of derailed my train of thought, so let me try to get back on track. So at this point in the build, I'm trying to work in some, I guess, roadways into this facility. I wanted there to be some kind of a way for trucks to get around. I've noticed for the most part that it kind of is like a free-for-all on the real deal, like there's not road markings all over the place, but I don't think that necessarily translates too well in this game. So I wanted to include just a little bit of road markings, not too many, just a few to suggest where traffic should flow and how it should flow, and then allow it to open up kind of into the main parking area for trucks and that kind of thing. So I didn't go too crazy with the regular road markings, but I like this little street running section here on the bottom of the screen. I think it's pretty cool. It's a nice touch, little shared section for trains and trucks. And I guess that kind of brings me back to what I was talking about earlier when I was saying that I like the idea of the main facility right here, what we're looking at on the screen, to sort of be a shared space between trucks and trains. And I think that that's just a really cool scene to have. And especially once I get some more details worked in there, I think it's going to look very, very cool. So I did most of the road marking stuff off camera, as you can tell, because I don't want to bore you guys too much with that anymore. So I did all of that off camera. You guys know my techniques. A lot of that was just sort of making executive decisions on my part about how I wanted things to come together and flow together and interact with each other. So I just did that off camera. It didn't really take too long to do. But at this point, I'm beginning to work in some greenery scenery along the side of the road. And this is another thing, like I said, I've been getting kind of feeling a bit stale with this sort of stuff, but I'm still trying to power through it. I did want the tracks to appear slightly overgrown. Maybe that they're only used like once a week or once every couple weeks, or that sort of look. I didn't want it to be like super well ballasted and maintained, like, class 1 track or something like that, or class 3, whatever, brand new track. So I did want it to be a little bit overgrown, so I spent a little bit of time adding some grasses and weeds and shrubs, and of course we need a way to delineate where the road is and where the road is not. And because we get a lot of texture bleed, that can get a little difficult to do, but I think this works pretty well by the time I get done with it. And I guess the other thing I should mention is that this track that goes into the brewery here is a stub-ended spur, basically. So trains are going to have to, I'm imagining, pull down off of the main line straight down this track across the highway and then reverse their way into the brewery complex, and then do whatever moves they need to do to switch out that facility. So just in doing my cinematics, I didn't fully switch out the industry, but just doing a couple of moves was quite time consuming. So I think that switching here is definitely going to be its own job, and it's definitely going to be a lot of fun to switch out, because it is a switching puzzle. I can foresee this getting very chaotic very quickly. So you really have to plan out what moves you're going to do and where you're going to park any cars that are going to be on the outbound. So I need to, I guess, kind of consider if I need to expand the main line a little bit, or the main track runaround or anything like that. I'm trying to not do that because I think it's long enough as it is, and we should be able to kind of make do with the space. But obviously, as time goes by and operations eventually commence on this thing, hopefully one day, we'll be able to make some adjustments that need to be made, either lengthening or shortening or adding sidings or anything like that. So for this crossing here, I did not want it to be a big official crossing with gates and lights and all this sort of stuff. It is just a spur for this industry here, so I'm kind of imagining that the trains would pull up to this and stop and flag the crossing. Maybe I can add a traffic light in there, and maybe that would be the way that stops traffic. I'm not really sure, but I know I didn't want it to be a big fancy crossing. I wanted it to just feel like an industrial crossing that only sees trains once in a while and kind of has that feel. So again, like I was saying, in terms of like filling in some of the negative space, I have no idea what's going to go back across the street. That's sort of background scenery. It'll probably be populated with other warehouses and stuff like that, but we'll see. I'm not going to focus too much on that right away. I'll get to that as time goes on. But I guess I might as well talk briefly about what my plan is for the next episode, which I think what we're going to do is continue the build around here. Like I said, adding in some more details and expanding these scenes here. And we do have one more industry on this side of the tracks that is going to go next to the brewery, and that is the candy facility, which is, the name is slipping my mind at the moment. I can't remember what it is. But that'll be the last industry on, I guess this would be the north side of the tracks. I can't remember all of these details of the P&B. It's so bad. But we'll continue doing some detail work here, and then begin work on the candy shop, whatever it is. I believe that I'm going to keep very simple and just have maybe 1 or 2 tracks for, a couple of inbound items. Maybe it's some sugar and then outbound candy or general goods or whatever it is. So I'm not going to go really crazy with that. I'm going to keep that kind of simple, because right now we've got these 2 really large dominating industries. We've got our oil facility, and then we've got this brewery, and I think one more large facility is just going to be way too much for this area, and especially considering on the adjacent side of the tracks, we're going to have to begin working on there's a scrapyard and then some kind of an intermodal facility, which I haven't really decided how I'm going to do yet, but I'm trying to attack these things just one at a time, and focus my attention on them individually without sort of splitting my judgment too much. So at this point, I'm trying to work in some of these details at least. I've got some palleted goods. I think some of these are like recycled items. Obviously, you're not going to know what they are. They're not meant to represent something specific. They're just sort of ambiguous items on pallets on the loading docks here. And I think that works. I'll probably work in some more stuff and, just try to make this feel like a really busy area. Like there's just constantly trucks being loaded or unloaded and train cars being loaded and unloaded. So I think that making this a really busy area is really going to benefit it and bringing it to life, especially once I start working in some people, which is always the last thing that I do. It's never at the top of my agenda for detail items. People are like the very last thing that I ever consider for some reason. It's just, I guess, just not important to me. So yeah, I'm trying to work in some pallets here, some details just to, make it look like there's actual workers doing stuff here. Putting the buildings on their own layer and locking the layer really helps when you're doing a build like this, because then you can add the scenery items onto the loading docks and move them around like I'm doing here without having to worry about moving any of your buildings. So at this point, I wanted to add some beer on some pallets on the loading docks, and I really wanted to add some kegs, but there were no kegs that I could find on the download station. I didn't have any built in or anything like that. So I went to CG Trader and bought some kegs and just imported them into the game myself. And lo and behold, here they are. And they look a little white, which is kind of weird because in Blender they're shiny and metallic, so there's something I'm doing wrong or I'm not exporting it properly. But the shape is there, it has an LOD, and so I just got to fix the coloring of it, but it fits the bill pretty decently, and I'll probably make a couple different variants of it, like stacks of them or groups of them, and I'll release those at some point. But that is pretty much going to do it for this time-lapse build part of this video. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and I'll catch you in the next one.